All right. Thank you so much, Allie Ray. I want to just make sure that I've got control of my screen here. Looking like I do. Awesome. Thank you also for the birthday love. I've almost forgot that it is my birthday tomorrow due to quarantine, but thank you all so much and so excited to dive in with you all today. Thank you again so much for joining and listening into our previous session so far. Today, I want to talk to you guys about how you can connect your marketing automation, CRM, and your sales engagement platform. What we're seeing today of where this is really kind of breaking is just people not being sure how their marketing automation tool can even integrate with their sales engagement platform. And more importantly, teams are just not sure how their different tools are working together. So marketing's tools, how are those working with sales engagements tools, the sales team's tools? I'm here to show you some quick tips and tricks, and we'll actually walk through a live demo. Before we dive into that, I want to ask you all, how many software solutions is your team using today? So we're going to do a quick little poll question. Daniela mentioned during her session that on average teams are using over 6 different tools. So want to ask you guys if you're using first option under 5, second option 5 to 10, or 10 plus. The reason why we want to ask this too is a big thing that we see with the customers that we're working with today is they have all of these amazing tools, but none of them are really working cohesively together. Both Daniela and Kevin mentioned some awesome tech stacks and some different tools that you guys should be investing in. And, you know, making sure that you are covering your bases in regards to your sales tech. So let's see what we've got for our answers here. Give everyone a second to answer. I can answer some questions here on the fly. Do you consider the phone a tool? Of course. My career started as an SDR, so I'm a big believer that phone is king. Always want to be using the phone for sure. All right, let's see our under 5, 55% of you are using 5 tools and under. 40% is in the 5 to 10 category, and 5% of people are in the 10 plus category. So anyone that answered the under 5, shoot me a DM, let's talk. The biggest issue moving in here, next slide, is a really handy dandy flow chart. We'll actually drop this in the chat here as well. You guys can have this as a resource. But one of the biggest challenges is when you do have your tools in place is what action is happening inside of what. That is one huge issue that we're seeing across the board is not sure what's happening in marketing automation versus what's happening in CRM versus what's happening in your sales engagement platform. And then what is your actual rep in charge of doing manually? So this kind of high level overview, you'll see that the majority of your actions and where your end user is going to live is really in the sales engagement space. So tools like SalesLoft and Outreach are 2 of the big players in the game. We use Outreach internally and also help implement that tool for customers. So we're going to dive into Outreach and kind of show you some back end tips and tricks to get going. We're going to move into a live workflow. So I'm first going to start with just showing you an example of a form fill that we use internally, and an example next inside of a CRM of a way to quickly route a lead. And then lastly, we'll spend some time inside of Outreach itself and giving you some handy dandy tips. We'll be going over, I'll be sharing with you 5 pro tips, which you may or may not be questioned on at the end of the session. So make sure y'all pay attention to the different pro tips I'll be sharing. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now and make sure I can figure out how to do that. Gotta love technology as we're talking about technology and technology challenges. All right. There we go. Perfect. So like I mentioned, I wanted to start here in a form fill that we actually do have live on our website. The reason why I wanted to start here is just to share our pro tip number 1. Try to bake in different qualifying questions into your form fill. So until we get to the actual place where people put in their, name and number, we're asking a couple questions to make sure that this lead that's filling out this form is getting routed correctly. A great way to be proactive and a great way to just kind of start off on the right foot with this prospect. So understanding what size their company is, or understanding who are they targeting. That's one of the biggest things that I feel like people miss during intake, is understanding who that customer is targeting, who their buyer personas are. You'll want to know that type of information to strengthen that relationship. Now, getting really into the weeds here, and for all my marketing folks out there, anyone that is in charge of creating a form fill, you want to make sure that the actual fields that you're including here are fields that are going to be required to create the lead inside of your CRM. Now, specific ones like email address and phone number, that's going to be most applicable for the end user once this lead is officially routed. Now, moving into Salesforce itself, pro tip number 2, if you are manually routing your leads, I promise you there is an easier way to do this. So this is a very basic example of a lead routing assignment within Salesforce. One call out I want to make to tool is Chili Piper. We're making a move internally to move into Chili Piper, but Chili Piper helps you guys set up form fills and also then routing your leads, and then more importantly can also help from a booking perspective. So highly recommend checking out Chili Piper if you have not, and if you're considering getting more involved in this form fill automation side of the world. So this example that I have here is really straightforward and basic. We're showing that I want to show my lead source is the free assessment, the form that we were just looking at. And I want to grab company size here as additional filters, which again is going to go back to my qualifying questions that you're utilizing in the form itself. This is helping me make sure that the companies that are from the 50 to 200 range are getting assigned to me, versus something that might be 200 plus is going to get routed to a different user inside of Skaled. So now that I have my lead created, my lead is routed, the form has been filled out, I'm going to now look at this lead inside of Salesforce and see that there's a couple fields that are going to be important for me to see. So first, the lead status. Marketing has now qualified this and moved it into an MQL status. And I'm seeing this lead source again is that free assessment. This lead source field is going to be the big catalyst to now put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. So now moving into outreach itself, this is where the rest of the magic is going to happen. So you can really think of a trigger within your sales engagement platform. So obviously we're outreach users, but you can do this type of workflow inside of SalesLoft as well. This is what I like to call the glue. This is what's going to make all of the magic now happen. So the first thing you're going to decide is, what event are you looking for to create this trigger? You'll notice that at the prospect level, and outreach calls prospects either just a lead or contact. So at the prospect level here, we have either 3 options: prospects being created, prospects being updated, or prospects being created or updated. We're going to want to use this option here, prospect created or updated, because this is going to cover your bases. In case this record already exists inside of your system, this is just going to grab that update that the lead source has switched to free assessment, the trigger is still going to go off, or if it's a net new record that's created once the form is filled out, this will kind of cover the bases for them as well. Pro tip number 3 inside of the trigger itself, specifically for inbound triggers, always recommend checking this box to make sure that this trigger is happening only once per target. This is again just for safety precautions, and just can make sure in case someone maybe goes back and fills out that same form again, you're not triggering off the same message that you've already sent them previously. The next area is where you're going to add your actual conditions. So this is why the lead source, The status is also important to make sure that's happening within your CRM from your marketing automation tool and building into outreach, because now we can really work with these fields. So source is something that you might not think about right away to map into outreach, but it's going to be the biggest catalyst to build out this trigger itself. So here I'm saying that the source is free assessment, and I'm also adding an additional condition that says that the stage equivalent to a status is the qualified MQL. Now this one is an important condition to add as well, in case you have maybe a current customer that goes back and fills out a form, their source might update. We want to make sure that we're only reaching out to these people that are in the qualified MQL stage umbrella. Now for the actual trigger actions. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to triggers of what you can actually, trigger off and have happen. But this example here, we're showing how to actually get somebody into a sequence. So kind of zooming back out, thinking about when someone fills out the form to now getting along to this step, there's only a couple minutes that have actually passed. So this is where it comes into play that efficiency and timing is going to be so important. There's a study that says you're 100 times more likely to actually connect with your inbound lead if you reach them 5 minutes after they've actually filled out the form. So this trigger is what helps make sure that when these leads are coming in from the form, they're automatically getting routed and assigned to the correct person, and the marketing team doesn't have to worry about any type of manual actions or different alerts for the team itself. The technology is taking care of all of that. So the action we're going to select is to actually add someone into the sequence. You'll see that we have a free assessment sequence created. So just a little side tip is to try to keep your naming conventions consistent throughout. So you'll notice, of course, the lead source is free assessment, the form fill is called free assessment, and now my sequence is also called free assessment, because as Kevin was just showing, you're going to have tons of different avenues from the marketing side, lots of different campaigns, direct mail, all of that stuff. So being as granular and specific as possible through a field, maybe it's source or a sub-source of some sort, that will really help make sure that these people are getting routed correctly and added into the correct sequence. You also have the option to select a different email address from who the actual email is going to be sending from. I always recommend making sure that you're selecting the prospect's owner as the default mailbox. So to recap, anytime a prospect is created or updated with the source of free assessment and is in the qualified stage, they're going to automatically go into my free assessment sequence. Now, to share a couple more tips and tricks, I'm going to go into the free assessment sequence itself. And what you're going to see here are a couple of things. The first thing you're noticing probably is all of this redness inside of a sequence, which you may not have noticed before if you've been inside of a sequence. As you're adding actual tasks within your sequence, you're able to add priorities. So pro tip number 4, for any type of inbound sequence that you are creating, whether it's a demo request, a free assessment form fill out, a download of content, whatever the case may be, you'll want to be consistent with the level of priority throughout the sequence. So you can see here, these are either set to urgent or high. So if I was an SDR and a rep, I would know exactly where I want to pivot my priorities and focuses for the day. So how to do that is quite simple. When you're adding in your step, and this is again for only the manual steps within the sequence. So a manual step in the sequence is going to be a manual email, a phone call, a generic task, which is just like a research step if you need to add that type of activity in, and also LinkedIn activity. All of those different tasks can be assigned a different level of priority. So you'll notice here that this phone call I have set to an urgent task priority. This is important because you can see first, the first step is happening 5 minutes after the prospect has actually hit the sequence. This is completely customizable. So if you want the email to send out a minute after the prospect hits this first step, that's possible. I have it set to 5 just to kind of fall under that 5-minute umbrella that I was just talking about. And from an SDR perspective, I'm a huge fan of a double tap. So here, my second step is a phone call, but you'll notice it's happening actually in the same day that the first email is getting sent out. So this way you can schedule your steps out down to the minute, down to the hour, and of course, from a couple days spaced out. This I have happening 1 hour after the first email is getting sent, and the reps are going to know that this is an urgent priority and definitely one that they'll want to execute versus, you know, a phone call task from the middle of a sequence or something like that. You'll notice throughout the sequence, even my LinkedIn activities, the sending a connection request is having a high priority assigned to it. So again, the rep knows how to prioritize their day. Now, moving into the tasks within outreach, pro tip number 5, I have my priorities entered here to sort and filter and drill down to find the task that I'm looking for. You can save this as a smart view, which is, so you can say like urgent, high tasks, create. And now when I'm a rep coming in for the day, instead of having to go through, add in all of my search criterias that I'm looking for, I now have this saved. I can click into it and it'll show me a full list of all of my different priorities here. So you can customize this completely again, but this is just showing you your urgent and high tasks. You can also drill down and get into the weeds of like what specific type of task you're looking for. So this is open right now. So this would show me all types of tasks based on, you know, the different types. So if you wanted to find just your call tasks, just your LinkedIn tasks, you can drill down and get even more in the weeds there. So with that being said, coming up on the hour here, I wanted to make sure we saved some time for questions. This, of course, is definitely very in the weeds, very technical, very tactical. And of course, we're, you know, aware that there's probably some people on the phone that might not be outreach users, might not be Salesforce users, but this concept of building out a trigger to help out the sales team is something that can be built out in whatever system that you have. So I'm happy to run through some questions that you guys have. I think Allie Ray, if you want to take the screen back over, you can take it away. Amazing. All right. Let's see. One question was, do you prefer classic over lightning? So it's a loaded question. I do feel a little biased. I think I still love classic. And I think Salesforce needs to rename lightning because it's not lightning fast. But I am getting more used to lightning and have been using it a lot more. Another question is, which lead status options do you use? So this is definitely a larger question and definitely a very process-oriented type of question. So depending on your business and depending on your marketing and sales teams, you know, it's really about making sure that the statuses are in alignment with, you know, which team should be handling that lead and when. So we know internally when something does hit to an MQL, that means the sales team is in charge of following up with those conversations. And if it's anything before that, we know that that's still in marketing's hands. Great question. Let's see, I think there's a couple other questions. Michael Scott blocked you on LinkedIn. Let's see, I think those are all of the questions that all these tech tools and softwares are great for a startup or small company. The cost of all these tools will start to add up. If you had to focus on just a few key tools to save costs that will make the most impact, what will these be? Amazing question. And we, at Skaled, do work with companies in all different sizes. So we've seen so many different types of tech stacks. I would say the number one most important tool, if you can make the investment, is in the sales engagement space. I can speak from my personal experience. When I started off in the SDR world, I was using Tout app and I was just blasting emails out and praying that someone responded. When I made the shift to using outreach, it really changed my day-to-day, and it changed, honestly, my entire sales career. It allows you to be extremely efficient, and can almost think of it as like a personal assistant. So letting you know exactly what day you're supposed to be calling Michael Scott back, what day you're supposed to be emailing him, what day you're supposed to be sending a connection request. I remember my desk just being covered in Post-it notes, and when I got outreach, I could just take all of those down and become extremely more efficient. So I would say that is definitely, out of all of the different types of tools, you'll really want to make sure that sales engagement is one that you consider. And the final poll question I have for you guys, thank you so much for all of your questions, is a fun one. I mentioned I'm going to quiz you on the 5 pro tips. Want to ask you which one is not a pro tip shared. So the first option, save your tasks in a smart view. Second one is bake in qualifying Theory questions into your form fill. Select one user's mailbox within the trigger actions, or trigger once per target for inbound sequences. So which one was not a pro tip? It's meant to be a little bit of a tricky question. Let's see if you guys are paying attention. While you guys are answering those, for small companies, what do you think about Zoho CRM versus Salesforce? I've never personally used Zoho, but I do have a couple customers I'm working with on the outreach side of things that are, and honestly, it's one of those things, there's just, the integrations there aren't as, of course, extensive as they are on the Salesforce side of things. So that's just, one thing to consider. If you are building out the rest of your tech stack, you might be a little bit more limited from a connection perspective. Any thoughts on the sequence feature in HubSpot versus outreach? Yeah, actually, I do have a little thought on that. So one of the biggest differentiators between HubSpot sequences and outreach sequences is HubSpot limits you to how many steps you can actually have in a sequence, where in outreach, there's no limitations. So this is a really important thing to know, because from a limitations perspective and best practice standpoint, from an inbound standpoint, you should be reaching out to that person at least 15 touches. So, HubSpot can kind of, not be as efficient in that side of things. So outreach is really the better option there. And let's see, 54% of you guys got the question right. The select one user's mailbox within the trigger actions, we're actually selecting to use the owner of the prospect when that message is sending out. All of the other options were pro tips. So hope they were helpful. And like I mentioned, I know that everyone has different tech stacks and are using different things. So we would love to talk more offline. Make sure you come to our happy hour session and chat through some more options and optimizations. And with that, I will pass the mic back over to Allie Ray.